The sun shone brightly over Bayview, Oregon that Saturday afternoon. The small coastal town had changed since the aliens arrived 3 years ago, but in ways most people had grown used to. Centauri ships sometimes passed overhead, their sleek, purple hulls catching the sunlight. Most humans barely looked up anymore. Jack Miller wiped his hands on his apron and smiled as he scooped another helping of birthday cake ice cream. His shop, Scoops and Smiles, was packed today. Billy Carter's birthday party filled the main section with laughter and the sweet smell of waffle cones. Jack had owned the ice cream shop for 15 years, but business had never been better than these past few summers. "Can I have sprinkles on mine, Mr. Miller?" asked little Amy Peterson, her front tooth missing and her pigtails bouncing as she stood on tiptoes to see over the counter. "Of course you can, Amy. Extra sprinkles for the birthday boy's friend," Jack said, adding a colorful mountain to her cone. 23 children and 12 adults filled the shop. Balloons hung from every corner and paper plates with half-eaten cake cluttered the tables. Billy's mom, Kate Carter, snapped photos while his dad, Ryan, handed out party favors, little plastic rockets, a nod to their new galactic neighbors. Amy took her ice cream and frowned. "I forgot to get napkins," she said to her mother. "Go ahead. Outside and get some from the dispenser, honey," her mom said, "but come right back." Amy skipped toward the door, stopping to look at a poster of the solar system on the wall. The newest edition included the Centauri homeworld. A shadow fell across the shop. "Wow, look! A scout ship!" Billy shouted, pointing through the big front window. The children rushed to see, pressing sticky fingers against the glass. A Centauri scout vessel hovered just 100 feet above the street. It was unusual to see one so low. Jack Miller felt something was wrong. The ship's position went against all the air traffic rules the aliens had agreed to follow. He stepped out from behind the counter. "Everyone move away from the windows, please," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. The ship's lower hull began to glow with a blue light. "That's not normal," Ryan Carter whispered, reaching for his son. Amy Peterson pushed open the front door, stepping outside with her ice cream cone. The blue light became blindingly bright. A beam shot downward with a sound like thunder. Amy turned just in time to see the beam hit the shop. The force knocked her backward onto the sidewalk, her ice cream flying away. Heat washed over her. A sound louder than anything she had ever heard filled the world. Then silence. Where Scoops and Smiles had stood was now only smoke, broken glass, and flames. The entire building had collapsed into itself. Where her friends had been laughing seconds before, there was now only a smoking crater. Amy sat frozen on the sidewalk, ice cream melting beside her. She couldn't scream. She couldn't cry. She just stared. The Centauri ship rose silently into the clouds and disappeared. Sirens began to wail within minutes. People ran from nearby shops. Someone picked Amy up and carried her away, asking questions she couldn't answer. Her ears were ringing. Her mind couldn't make sense of what she had seen. By evening, the entire world knew what had happened in Bayview. News drones captured footage of rescue workers pulling small bodies from the rubble. They showed Amy, the lone survivor, sitting wrapped in a shock blanket as a doctor checked her for injuries. 23 children dead, the news anchor said, her voice shaking. 9 adults. The worst attack on American soil since the terrorist attacks of the early century. Within hours, the Centauri High Command issued a statement. A human translator read it on global channels. The Centauri Confederation expresses mechanical regret for the unfortunate navigation error that resulted in damage to a human refreshment facility. According to Galactic Confederation protocols, standard reparations will be issued at the rate of 15,000 universal credits per juvenile and 8,000 per adult life form terminated. The pilot responsible has been reassigned to non-Earth duties. The statement only made things worse. President Diane Franklin addressed the nation from the Oval Office that night. Her face was drawn, her normally perfect hair slightly disheveled. My fellow Americans, today we have witnessed an act that defies understanding. The loss of so many innocent children is a wound in our national heart. Her voice broke slightly. I have spoken directly with the Centauri ambassador and made it clear that their response is wholly inadequate. I have demanded a full investigation and real accountability. In Bayview, hundreds of people gathered around the ruins of the ice cream shop. They brought flowers, teddy bears, and handwritten notes. They brought candles that flickered in the coastal breeze. Among them was Amy Peterson, holding her mother's hand tightly. A reporter approached them cautiously. "Amy, can you tell us how you feel?" she asked, kneeling down. Amy looked at the camera with empty eyes. "They were my friends," she said simply. Billy was turning 10 today. The image of Amy's tear-streaked face was broadcast worldwide. It appeared on buildings in Times Square, on screens in Tokyo, on news feeds in living rooms around the planet. A child surrounded by death, speaking a truth no diplomatic statement could match. At the Pentagon, an emergency meeting had been called. Military leaders, politicians, and scientists sat around a large table, watching the Zentari ambassador on a screen. "You must understand," the ambassador said, his translator conveying his clicking speech, "that by galactic standards, this response is more than generous. Juvenile loss is unfortunate but compensated by simple mathematical formula. Your emotional overreaction is noted but unnecessary." Naval Commander Gregory Daniels slammed his fist on the table. "Those were children, human children. Yes, pre-adult, humans. We understand this. The credits will be transferred within 3 standard cycles," the ambassador replied. Dr. Ellen Morrison, Earth's leading expert on alien psychology, watched the exchange with growing understanding. The Zentari genuinely couldn't comprehend why humans were so upset. Their species produced thousands of offspring. They viewed their young as largely expendable until reaching adulthood. "We don't want your credits," President Franklin said, entering the room. "We want justice." The ambassador's face tentacles wiggled in what Dr. Morrison recognized as confusion. "Justice has a numerical value. We have calculated it." After the transmission ended, the room fell silent. "They don't get it," Dr. Morrison said quietly. "They literally cannot understand what they've done." President Franklin looked around the room at the grim faces of her advisors. "Then perhaps it's time we help them understand." Commander Daniels nodded slowly. "Madam President, with your permission, I'd like to assemble a special task force." "What kind of task force?" the President asked. "One that will teach the Zentari something about human nature," Daniels said. "Something they clearly need to learn." In Bayview, as night fell, Amy Peterson placed her favorite teddy bear atop the growing memorial. It was the last gift her father had given her before he died 2 years ago. She whispered something to the bear, a private goodbye to the friends she would never see again. Nobody knew it yet, but Amy Peterson would soon become more than a survivor. She would become a symbol of humanity's response to an atrocity that came from the stars. The rain fell steadily on Bayview Cemetery as they buried the children. 23 small coffins lined up in a row, each covered with flowers, toys, and pictures. The entire town came, along with thousands from across the country. They stood, silently under black umbrellas, their faces streaked with tears that mixed with raindrops. Amy Peterson wore a black dress her mother had bought for the occasion. She held a single white rose as she walked past each coffin, placing a petal on each one. When she reached Billy Carter's coffin, she placed the stem with the last few petals on top. She had saved his for last because he was her best friend. "Goodbye, Billy," she whispered. Kate and Ryan Carter stood by their son's coffin, holding each other. Kate hadn't spoken a word since the attack. Ryan nodded at Amy as she placed the rose. His eyes were red and hollow. President Diane Franklin attended, every funeral over 3 days. She spoke no political words, made no speeches about justice or response. She simply came as a mourner, sitting quietly at the back, sometimes holding the hands of parents too broken to stand on their own. After the last funeral, she met with Amy and her mother at their home. "Amy, I know this is very hard, President," Franklin said, sitting across from the small girl. "But I need to ask you something. Did you see anything unusual before the ship fired?" Amy looked at her hands. "The ship came down real low, lower than they usually do, and there was a blue light, not like their normal lights." She looked up. Billy was so excited to see it up close. That's the last thing I remember him saying. President Franklin nodded and gently patted Amy's hand. Thank you. You're a very brave girl. Back in Washington, D.C., the Zentari ambassador requested another meeting. He stood tall in the White House Situation Room, his 7-foot frame making the human chairs impossible for him to use. His skin was pale purple, and the tentacles around his mouth twitched as the translator converted his clicks and whistles. The High Command has authorized an additional payment, he announced. We understand your cultural attachment to pre-adults exceeds galactic norms. Therefore, we will double the reparation credits. The room was silent. Secretary of State Linda, Marshall looked at her notes rather than at the alien. Defense Secretary John Bell stared at the wall. Only Commander Daniels watched the ambassador directly, his gaze never wavering. Ambassador, President Franklin said finally, we don't want more credits. We want to understand why this happened. A navigation error doesn't explain a weapons discharge. The ambassador's skin darkened slightly, which Dr. Morrison recognized as discomfort. There was no navigation error, the ambassador admitted after a long pause. The High Command has authorized me to share limited facts. The pilot was conducting an authorized scientific study of human emotional responses. Such studies are standard procedure when encountering new species. The room erupted in shouts until President Franklin raised her hand. You're saying, she said slowly, that your government deliberately targeted a building full of children as an experiment? Yes, the ambassador replied simply. We needed to observe human response to juvenile loss. Your species places unusual importance on individual offspring. Most galactic civilizations produce thousands. The survival rate is not important. Dr. Morrison stepped forward. So you thought it acceptable to kill our children to study how we'd react? It is standard protocol, the ambassador said. We have conducted similar studies on 12 other species. The data helps us understand cultural response patterns. President Franklin stood up. This meeting is over. Please inform your government that all diplomatic relations are suspended. You have 48 hours to leave Earth. After the ambassador left, President Franklin turned to Commander Daniels. Tell me about this task force you're assembling. We call it Operation Sandcastle, Commander Daniels said, opening a folder. Dr. Morrison has identified a critical vulnerability in Zentari psychology that we believe can be exploited without conventional weapons. I'm listening, the president said. Dr. Morrison displayed brain scans on the large screen. The Zentari evolved from colonial organisms. Think of them as halfway between individual beings and a hive mind. They maintain a subtle telepathic connection with others of their kind at all times. Total isolation is their deepest fear, similar to how humans fear death. Commander Daniels continued, We've recruited Dr. Paul Clark from MIT. He's developed a method to disrupt their telepathic field. We can make each Zentari feel completely alone, cut off from their collective consciousness. What would that do to them? President Franklin asked. Based on captured Zentari texts, we believe it would cause extreme psychological distress, Dr. Morrison explained. Their historical records show that isolated Zentari typically experience something like severe panic attacks, disorientation, and total cognitive collapse. Without firing a single shot, Commander Daniels added. President Franklin nodded slowly. How soon can this be ready? We need 3 weeks to prepare the devices and modify 5 civilian transport ships, Daniels said. We'll need civilian volunteers for the mission, people who lost someone in the attack. In a small conference room down the hall, Susan Wright sat looking at a photo of her son Ethan. He had been at Scoops and Smiles buying an ice cream cone when the attack happened. He was just stopping in after soccer practice. Wrong place. Wrong time. Susan had been a communications specialist in the Navy before becoming a civilian contractor. Now she stared at Commander Daniels across the table. You want me to deliver the message? She asked. Yes, he replied. We need someone who understands both the technical aspects and who has personal motivation. Susan looked back at her son's picture. What exactly would I be saying to them? The truth, Daniels said. You would tell them about your son, about all the children. You would make them understand what they've done. And then you'll activate this disruption field? Yes, during their Festival of Connection, their most important cultural event, when every Zentari will be linked in a stronger telepathic bond than usual. Susan took a deep breath. Will it hurt them? Not physically, but mentally. It will be the worst experience of their lives. Susan nodded. Good. Meanwhile, in a secure facility in Nevada, naval engineer Hank Brown directed a team working on 5 ordinary-looking transport ships. They had been stripped down and rebuilt with Dr. Clark's disruption technology hidden inside their hulls. The beauty of it, Hank explained to a group of technicians, is that they'll scan these ships and see nothing but standard human vessels. The disruption generators operate on principles the Zentari don't understand and can't detect. The technicians worked day and night. Many had friends or family in Bayview. Some had attended the funerals. They worked with quiet determination, rarely speaking about what they were building. Back in Bayview, the crater where Scoops and Smiles once stood had become a memorial site. Thousands of toys, flowers, and cards covered the area. At night, hundreds of candles flickered in the coastal breeze. Amy Peterson came every day after school, sitting quietly on a bench that had been placed facing the crater. Sometimes she would talk to her friends as if they could hear her. One evening, Commander Daniels visited the memorial. He found Amy sitting alone as the sun set over the Pacific. "Hello, Amy," he said, sitting beside her. "Do you remember me?" "I was at the funerals." Amy nodded. "You're the Navy man. My dad was in the Navy." "I know," Daniels said. "He was a good man." They sat in silence for a while, watching as the candles were lit for the evening. "Are you going to do something to them?" Amy asked suddenly. "To the aliens who did this?" Commander Daniels looked at her in surprise. "Why do you ask that?" "Because you have that look," Amy said. "My dad had that look when he had to go away for a long time. Mom called it his mission face." Daniels smiled slightly. "You're a very smart girl, Amy." He looked back at the memorial. "Yes, we're going to do something. Something that will make sure they never hurt children again. Any children anywhere." "Good," Amy said simply, and went back to watching the candles. The White House maintained a calm front. For all the world could see, America was taking the diplomatic approach with the Zentari. President Franklin spoke of ongoing negotiations and peaceful resolution in her public addresses. Meanwhile, Operation Sandcastle moved forward in secret. Dr. Paul Clark hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night for 2 weeks. His lab at MIT had been moved to the secure facility in Nevada, where he fine-tuned the disruption technology. He was a tall, thin man with thick glasses and hands that always seemed to be in motion. The key breakthrough, he explained to Commander Daniels during a late-night briefing, was understanding that the Zentari telepathic field operates on quantum principles. They don't just communicate thoughts, they share consciousness at a fundamental level. "And you can block that?" Daniels asked. "Better than block it," Dr. Clark said, his eyes bright with the excitement of scientific discovery. "We can create a quantum barrier that makes each Zentari mind believe it's completely alone in the universe. They'll still be surrounded by others of their kind, but they won't be able to sense them at all." Hank Brown joined them, bringing coffee. "The generators are installed in all 5 ships. We've tested them on the Zentari prisoner. During the initial chaos after the attack, a Zentari maintenance worker had been captured at their embassy. The worker had been kept in a special holding cell, used only for testing the disruption field in carefully measured doses. "And the effects?" Daniels asked. "Exactly as Dr. Morrison predicted," Hank said. "Complete mental breakdown within seconds. The subject couldn't speak, couldn't move, could barely breathe. After we turned off the field, it took hours for him to recover." Daniels nodded. "And there are no physical effects? No tissue damage?" "None," Dr. Clark confirmed. "This isn't a weapon in the traditional sense. It doesn't harm the body at all. It only affects the mind." In another part of the facility, Susan Wright recorded her message. She sat in a small studio surrounded by pictures of the children who had died in Bayview. She spoke directly to the camera, holding a photo of her son Ethan. "My name is Susan Wright," she said, her voice steady. "This is my son Ethan. He was 12 years old. He loved soccer, video games, and chocolate ice cream. He wanted to be an astronaut when he grew up. He thought meeting aliens was the coolest thing ever." She placed Ethan's photo down and picked up another one. "This is Billy Carter. He was turning 10 the day your ship killed him. He collected rocks and could name every planet in 3 star systems." One by one, she held up photos of all 23, children and 9 adults, sharing something personal about each one, their hopes, their dreams, their favorite ice cream flavors. She spoke for over an hour, making sure each victim was remembered not as a statistic but as a person. "You studied our emotional response," she said toward the end. "Now we will help. You understand it? Not through words, but through experience. We are not a hive. We are individuals. Each child you killed was unique, irreplaceable. Now you will learn what it means to be truly alone, as our children were in their final moments." The recording was loaded onto all 5 ships. The volunteer crews trained day and night. They were all civilians who had lost someone in the attack. Parents, siblings, friends. They would pilot the ordinary-looking transport vessels to the edge of Zentari space, then make a final jump to their homeworld. During the Festival of Connection, at the United Nations, diplomatic channels remained open. The Zentari had sent a new ambassador, who continued to express confusion about human reactions. "We have now offered triple the standard reparation rate," the new ambassador said through his translator. "This exceeds all galactic norms. Why do you continue to reject our generous offer?" "Because we don't put a price tag on our children," replied the American representative. "Because no amount of credits can replace a human life." The ambassador's face tentacles writhed in what seemed to be frustration. "This position is not rational. All life forms can be replaced through reproduction." Dr. Morrison, watching from the side, made notes on her tablet. The Zentari truly couldn't comprehend human attachment to individual children. Their inability to understand was not diplomatic posturing. It was a fundamental difference in psychology. The day before the HFY mission launch, Commander Daniels visited Susan Wright in her quarters. She was looking at a star map showing the Zentari home system. "Are you ready?" he asked. She nodded. "I've been ready since the day I identified Ethan's body." "You understand that there's risk involved," Daniel said. "Even though we'll be using civilian ships with proper travel permits, if the Zentari realize what we're doing, they could destroy our ships." Susan finished his thought. "I know. Everyone on this mission knows. We're all willing to take that risk." Daniels handed her a small box. "This came for you from Bayview." Susan opened it to find a small teddy bear with a note attached. "This is Kenny," the note read. "He helps me when I'm scared. Maybe he can help you too. Come back safe. Amy Peterson." Susan held the bear tightly and allowed herself to cry, for the first time since the mission began. On launch day, the 5 ships prepared to depart from different locations around the world to avoid drawing attention. Each ship had a crew of 3, a pilot, a communications officer, and a technician to operate the disruption generator. President Franklin addressed the crews via secure video link from the White House. "What you are about to do is not an act of war," she said. "It is an act of education. The Zentari killed our children to study how we would respond emotionally. Today we will show them exactly what human emotion means. Not by killing their children in return, but by making them feel what our children felt in their final moments, the terror of being utterly alone." She paused, her eyes moving from screen to screen, looking at each volunteer. "You carry with you the hopes of humanity, but also our values. We do not repay death with death. We bring understanding where there was none. Godspeed to all of you." Daru, Nevada. Commander Daniels and Dr. Morrison watched as the first ship launched. It looked like any other civilian transport, the kind that had been making regular trips to Zentari space for trade purposes over the past 3 years. "Will this work?" Dr. Morrison asked quietly. "It has to," Daniels replied, "because the alternative is actual war, and that would mean millions of deaths on both sides." As the ships disappeared into the sky, Amy Peterson sat on her bench at the memorial in Bayview. She held a picture of all the children from Billy's birthday party, taken just minutes before the attack. In the photo, they were all smiling, ice cream on their faces, unaware that their lives were about to end. "Something's happening," she said to the empty air. "I can feel it." The wind picked up, blowing across the memorial site, making the candles flicker but not go out. The 5 ships traveled separately, taking different routes to avoid suspicion. They blended in with regular trade traffic, their hulls marked with standard commercial logos. Inside each ship, the crew maintained radio silence except for normal traffic control communications. Susan Wright was aboard the lead ship, the Pacific Trader. She sat at the communications station, reviewing the recording she would broadcast. Beside her console sat Amy's teddy bear, Kenny. Susan had pinned pictures of all 23 children to the wall of her station. She looked at them often. 2 days until we reach Zentari space, said Frank Powell, the pilot. He was a retired commercial pilot whose grandson had been at the ice cream shop. "Are you nervous?" Susan asked. Frank shook his head. "No, I've never been more certain of anything in my life." In the engine room, Karen Lee checked the disruption generator for the 5th time that day. The device was about the size of a refrigerator, humming quietly as it ran through its automatic diagnostics. Karen had been a physics teacher at Bayview High School. Many of the children who died had been her students. "All systems normal," she reported over the ship's intercom. "Generator is at 100% capacity." Back on Earth, President Franklin addressed the United Nations General Assembly. Every nation on Earth had tuned in to hear her speak. 1 month ago, an unthinkable tragedy occurred in a small town in Oregon, she began. 23 children and 9 adults were killed when a Zentari ship fired on an ice cream shop. The Zentari claimed it was a navigation error. Later, they admitted it was a deliberate act, an experiment to study human emotional responses. Gasps filled the chamber. This was the first public confirmation of what had only been rumored. "Today, I am revealing the full truth," the president continued. The Zentari High Command authorized this attack as part of a series of tests on what they call lesser species. They have conducted similar experiments on 12 other civilizations. On screens around the chamber, classified Zentari documents appeared, translated into multiple languages. The documents detailed cold clinical plans for emotional resilience testing on various species, with humans being the most recent subjects. The attack was not an isolated incident or the action of a rogue officer, President Franklin said. It was official Zentari policy. At the secure facility in Nevada, Commander Daniels and Dr. Morrison watched a large screen showing the positions of the 5 ships. They were all on schedule, approaching Zentari space from different vectors. "The Festival of Connection begins in 18 hours, Dr. Morrison said. "All 5 ships need to be in position by then." "They will be," Daniels assured her. "What exactly happens during this festival?" "It's the most important cultural event in Zentari society," Dr. Morrison explained. "Their entire population joins in a mass telepathic connection. They share memories, emotions, experiences. It strengthens their collective bond." "Making it the perfect time for our disruption field," Daniels nodded. "When they're most connected, the shock of sudden isolation will be most severe." On the Zentari homeworld, preparations for the festival were underway. Massive crystal structures were erected in city centers, designed to amplify the telepathic field. Zentari of all ages gathered, their skin shifting through shades of purple and blue in anticipation. The 5 human ships approached the outer boundary of Zentari space. They were stopped at a checkpoint as expected. "State your purpose," came the translated message from a Zentari patrol ship. "Commercial delivery," Frank replied, sending over the proper codes and paperwork. "Carrying electronic components for the embassy." After a brief scan, they were waved through. The same scene played out with each of the 5 ships at different checkpoints. None raised any suspicion. President Franklin continued her address. "We have attempted to explain to the Zentari why their actions were wrong. We have tried to make them understand the value we place on each human life, especially the lives of our children. They have responded with confusion and offers of credit. Payments, she paused, looking directly into the cameras. Today that changes. Today the Zentari will learn what it means to be human, to feel what we feel. In Bayview, Amy Peterson sat in her classroom, unable to focus on the lesson. She kept looking out the window at the cloudy sky. Something was coming. She could feel it. Her teacher noticed her distraction but said nothing. All the adults in town were extra gentle with Amy these days. The 5 ships entered Zentari inner space, positioning themselves strategically around the homeworld. They maintained their cover as commercial vessels, requesting standard orbital patterns that would place them above major population centers. "We're in position," Frank told Susan. 12 minutes until the festival begins." Susan nodded and prepared. Her transmission. Karen began the final preparations on the disruption generator, warming it up to full power. On the Zentari homeworld, millions gathered in great amphitheaters. The High Command, dressed in ceremonial robes, took their places on elevated platforms. The air hummed with the beginning of the telepathic bond, strengthening minute by minute as more minds joined the connection. In Nevada, Dr. Clark watched the readings from sensors they had secretly placed in Zentari space months earlier. "The telepathic field is intensifying," he reported. "The festival has begun." Commander Daniels nodded. "Give the go signal." On all 5 ships, the crews received the simple message, "Sandcastle." Susan Wright took a deep breath and opened the A channel. Her broadcast would go to every Zentari communication device, overriding their normal frequencies. "My name is Susan Wright," her recording began as pictures of the children appeared on Zentari screens planet-wide. "This is my son Ethan. He was 12 years old." In the Zentari capital, the High Commander's face tentacles froze in shock as the human message interrupted the festival. Around him, other leaders looked at the images of human children appearing on their display screens. "What is this?" he demanded. Susan's voice continued, describing each child, their dreams, their hopes, their favorite ice cream flavors. The simple, personal details that made each one unique and irreplaceable. As the recording played, Karen activated the disruption generator. The device hummed louder, then emitted a pulse of energy invisible to the naked eye. The other 4 ships activated their generators simultaneously. The effect was immediate and devastating. Across the Zentari homeworld, billions of minds suddenly felt completely alone. The telepathic bond that had been part of their existence since birth vanished. Where there had been the comforting presence of countless others, there was now only silence. Panic erupted everywhere. Zentari fell to the ground, their skin turning gray with distress. They reached out physically to others around them, but the mental connection was gone. They could see each other, touch each other, but could not feel each other's presence in their minds. In the Capitol amphitheater, the High Commander collapsed, his ceremonial robes tangling around him as he writhed in panic. Other leaders fell from their platforms, their minds unable to process the sudden, complete isolation. "Maximum effect achieved," Dr. Clark reported, watching the sensor readings. "Total disruption of the telepathic field." On the screens in Nevada, they could see chaos unfolding across the Zentari cities. Ships fell from the sky as pilots lost their ability to function. Defense systems went offline as operators collapsed at their posts. "Not a single shot fired," Commander Daniels said quietly. "Not one drop of blood spilled." Susan's recording continued to play on all Zentari devices. "You studied our emotional response, now we will help you understand it. Not through words, but through experience." For 3 days, the disruption field remained active. The 5 ships maintained their positions, generators humming at full capacity. On Earth, people watched limited footage captured by long-range sensors, showing Zentari cities in chaos. Not violent chaos. There was no fighting or destruction, but the chaos of a civilization experiencing collective psychological trauma. President Franklin held daily briefings with Commander Daniels and Dr. Morrison. "What exactly are they experiencing?" she asked on the 3rd day. Based on our test subject and Zentari literature, Dr. Morrison explained, they're feeling what humans might describe as extreme panic, disorientation, and existential dread. To a Zentari, being cut off from the collective is like suddenly losing all 5 senses at once. Are we causing permanent damage? The president asked. No, Dr. Clark assured her, joining the call from Nevada. Once we deactivate the field, they'll recover. The younger ones will bounce back quickly. The older ones might need more time. President Franklin nodded. Then it's time. Send the signal to shut down the generators. In orbit around the Zentari homeworld, Susan Wright received the code to end the operation. She looked one last time at the pictures of the children, then nodded to Karen. Shutting down the disruptor, Karen said, beginning the sequence. One by one, all 5 ships powered down their generators. The invisible quantum barrier that had blocked the Zentari telepathic field disappeared. Across the Zentari world, minds reconnected. It started slowly, like ice melting, then built rapidly as the natural telepathic bond reformed. Zentari who had been curled into fetal positions slowly uncurled. Those who had been frozen in place began to move again. In the capital, leaders, who had been unable to function for 3 days, shakily returned to their feet. Susan activated her communication channel one last time. People of Zentari, she said, her own voice this time, not the recording. You have now experienced what our children felt in their final moments, the terror of being utterly alone. We could have responded to your attack with weapons. We could have taken Zentari lives as you took human lives. We chose not to. Remember this moment. Remember what you have learned about humanity today. The 5 ships turned and began their journey home. They expected possible pursuit or attack, but none came. The Zentari fleet remained grounded, its crews still recovering. 3 days later, as the human ships approached Earth, a message arrived from the Zentari High Command. It was addressed personally to President Franklin. We request permission to send a diplomatic vessel to Earth. The message read, the entire High Command wishes to come in person. We have understanding to share. After consulting with her advisors, the President granted permission with strict security protocols. The Zentari vessel would be allowed to land at a remote Air Force base with only a small delegation aboard. When the 5 ships from Operation Sandcastle landed, they were greeted as heroes. Susan Wright and the other volunteers were met by Commander Daniels, Dr. Morrison, and President Franklin herself. You have done something extraordinary, the President told them. You have changed the course of human-Zentari relations forever. Susan looked tired but at peace. I didn't do it for relations, she said quietly. I did it for Ethan, for all of them. 1 week later, the Zentari diplomatic vessel arrived. It landed at the designated Air Force base in the Nevada desert. Unlike the usual Zentari ships with their sleek purple hulls, this one was painted white, their color of humility and contrition. The entire High Command emerged, 7 tall, purple-skinned aliens who had never before left their homeworld. They walked slowly, their movements still slightly unsteady from their experience. They carried no weapons and wore simple white robes rather than their usual elaborate ceremonial garments. They were escorted to a large hangar that had been converted into a meeting room. President Franklin waited for them, along with Commander Daniels, Dr. Morrison, and Susan Wright. But there was one more person present, sitting quietly beside the President, Amy Peterson. The Zentari High Commander approached and, to everyone's surprise, lowered himself to one knee before Amy. Small human, he said through his translator, we have come to speak directly to you. Amy looked at him without fear. Why me? Because you alone survived. Because you represent all those who were lost. The High Commander gestured, and the other 6 Zentari also knelt. In their culture, this was unprecedented. The High Command had never knelt before any being, not even in their own history. The Zentari Confederation has experienced what you humans call empathy, the High Commander said. For 3 days we felt isolation. We felt fear. We felt what our actions caused others to feel. It has changed us, He reached into his robe and pulled out a small crystal tablet. "We have created a new law. It will be shared with all spacefaring civilizations. We call it the Protocol of the Children. It declares that no juvenile of any species may be harmed, for any reason, under penalty of severe sanctions from all signatory worlds." The High Commander placed the tablet on the floor before Amy. "We ask your permission to enact this law in memory of those who were lost in what you call Bayview." Amy looked at President Franklin, who nodded encouragingly. "They would have liked that," Amy said simply. "Especially Billy. He always wanted to help people." 3 months later, the crater where Scoops and Smiles had once stood was transformed. The memorial flowers and toys were carefully preserved, but around them a garden had been planted. Trees from Earth and saplings from the Zentari homeworld grew side by side. A path wound through the garden with 23 small fountains, one for each child, bubbling with clear water. On the day the garden was dedicated, Amy Peterson stood with Commander Daniels and his wife Laura. After the attack, with her mother struggling with grief and unable to care for her, the Daniels had become Amy's foster parents. "It's time," Commander Daniels said gently. Amy nodded and walked forward. A small Zentari child, the first ever to visit Earth, walked beside her. Together they planted the final sapling in the center of the garden. The Earth child and the alien child patted the soil around the small tree together. "What do you call this on your world?" Amy asked. "It is called a memory tree," the Zentari child replied through a small translator. "It grows stronger with each passing season." Around the garden, human and Zentari adults watched in silence. Susan Wright stood with Karen and Frank, who had served with her on the Pacific Trader. They wore no medals or honors. Operation Sandcastle remained classified, but they knew what they had accomplished. "Did we do the right thing?" Susan whispered. "Look," Frank said, nodding toward Amy and the Zentari child, now sitting together, beside the small tree. Throughout the galaxy, news spread of Earth's response to the Bayview massacre. Other civilizations, some far more advanced than humans, took note of how this young species had brought a superior military power to its knees without firing a shot. Not through force of arms, but through the power of making others understand their pain. They learned what the Zentari had discovered. Humans would not respond to cruelty with more cruelty, but harm their children, and they would find your deepest fear and make you live it until you understood why you should never harm a child again. As the sun set over Bayview Memorial Garden, Amy touched the small tree and whispered, "See, Billy, I told you everything would be okay."